Mikhail Rasputin is the brother of X-Men's Colossus and Magic. Born and raised in the Soviet Union, he may not be as strong as his brother at first glance, but dig deep and there's a whole other story involved. He has various powers including space and interdimensional travel. His ability to control various types of energy-based powers and matter at a subatomic level, along with a few other things, make him an alpha-level mutant. Mikhail has a history of causing trouble for the X-Men because of his past traumas and inability to recover from them. We'll be discussing that and a few of his comic arcs as well. So without waiting around anymore, let's dive in. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. Exploring the origins and the first comic book appearance of Mikhail Rasputin. Mikhail Rasputin is the lesser-known older brother to the Colossus. He was born and raised in the Soviet Union and stuck to the Rasputin family legacy. This piqued his interest in exploring his powers and their limits. However, since his family was constantly butting in, he wouldn't be able to freely explore his powers as he wanted. Therefore, he does what any other rich Soviet would do. He established a fake government agency and enlisted as a cosmonaut. From there, he went off to space and their shuttle exploded. His family was informed of the death of their son, but that's what the Soviets were hoping for. They knew that Mikhail would survive the explosion. Mikhail's powers ripped away at the subatomic wall of space, basically creating a rift in space. This ended up landing him in a Dungeons and Dragons kind of world. Being the sole survivor wasn't the only shock, the second was adjusting to his new technologically impoverished planet. Mikhail performed a great job. The locals had no trouble putting their trust in him. He also married the princess he had fallen in love with. But because of his somewhat despotic father-in-law, Mikhail became involved in political disputes that ultimately sparked a civil war. The rift that he initially created when he was on the verge of death reopened for unknown causes. Due to the reaction, which slaughtered thousands of his own people, notably his wife, Mikhail was able to close it. But the loss of his people, even if it did save a lot of them, was too much for him to bear. Mikhail, whose new existence was a disaster, escaped to the world desert and stayed there until the X-Men and Sunfire made their way through the reopened rift to try to close it. Here, as he bided his time, he came across a fallen storm in the middle of the desert. Through her, he learned that the portal is open again and is expanding. He warns Storm of the impending doom that will befall them all if they don't close the rift as soon as possible. When Colossus and the others first show up, they are lauded as heroes and saviors to the rebel groups who are trying to close the portal as well, because they defeated the other group who were probably trying to open the rift. He saw his long-lost brother Pyotr, who is now a part of the X-Men as Colossus, at the gathering with the X-Men, which was very meaningful to him. Mikhail was reluctant to use his abilities again, but the X-Men persuaded him to do so. By utilizing Iceman and Sunfire's elemental receptors, Mikhail was able to manage the backlash, which allowed them to close the breach and return to Earth without suffering any casualties. Then Mikhail traveled with his brother and the X-Men to America. He found that life on Earth was more difficult than he had anticipated. He was tormented in his imagination by images of his deceased loved ones. Even his brother was powerless to aid him, despite the fact that they once more grew close. How Mikhail Rasputin has mastered the art of manipulation in the X-Force story arc. In X-Force issue 24, we find out a bit about the Chronicler and how far Mikhail Rasputin will go to achieve his goals. This issue also shows us how far he will go to manipulate his own brother, Colossus. First, let me explain who the Chronicler is. He is a mutant who has the ability to affect people through words. His name is quite self-explanatory, honestly. He writes things and they happen. However, this person considers himself an actual writer, so he has something he calls artistic integrity. Basically, he means that he won't just write whatever. He cares about what he writes and needs to understand the person before he can actually write to affect them. Also, to be noted is that it doesn't matter what he uses to write or what he writes on. So the next thing we see is the Chronicler being held here against his will by Mikhail. This is an interesting bit because we get to see some interaction between the Chronicler and Mikhail. One thing's for sure, that the Chronicler really likes alcohol. This is because Mikhail creates a vintage wine bottle out of thin air and the Chronicler's mouth is almost watering. He's entranced. Mikhail, however, drops the bottle on the floor, breaking it. The Chronicler is so mad for it that he jumps down and starts licking the wine off the floor. All this while, Mikhail keeps asking the Chronicler to write about his brother for him to do what he wants. Yet the Chronicler stood with his principle of not writing something that was unnatural to him or the person he is writing about. We don't know for sure. At this point, Mikhail used the broken glass bottle to skewer the Chronicler's left hand. When the Chronicler rebuts, saying that if Mikhail were to hurt this talent, then he would lose his means of interfering with Colossus. To this, Mikhail replies saying that if a gift is a waste, then it is no gift at all, implying that if the Chronicler doesn't get to work soon, his right hand may be next, and possibly not the last. Through this interaction, we see that Mikhail can give anything that the chronicler might want, but also take everything away from him. As he gets to work, Mikhail pours him a liquor made of ingredients grown in his homeland. Meanwhile, Colossus has been living the quiet life in the Savage Lands with his love interest Kayla. They're basically growing fields of Crocoan flowers and of calm and quiet lovey-dovey honeymoon type days. We don't know much of anything about Kayla except that she's suspicious of other mutants and very much in love with and protective about Colossus. Another thing Colossus does in his country life is paint. So far, Colossus has been manipulated to paint pictures. Pictures of literally everything. To provide some backstory, mutants are living peacefully on the island of Krakoa and the rest of the world doesn't know about this. It is an independent state with Magneto and Professor X living in harmony too. So pictures of the healing gardens, the resurrection pods, the quiet council, the shadow room, etc. getting into the wrong hands would mean a lot of trouble for the mutants on Krakoa. These are state secrets of the X-Force and the X-Corps. This stuff getting out could potentially mean war for them. World War. Sometime later, we see that Kayla has found the paintings. She breaks down and cries, hearing which Colossus comes rushing. He tells her that he could explain everything and that it's going to be alright. He opens his arms wide, motioning for her to come to him. He knows she feels safe and secure in his arms. However, what seems a bit off about the whole thing is that when we first see Colossus in this issue, he is in his normal human skin. However, here he is fully metal skinned. As Kayla comes and hugs Colossus, he holds her for a moment and then snaps her neck. This happens because the chronicler has written it so in Mikhail's request. This is how far he is willing to go. His plans are to have those paintings shipped out to interested parties like the press or government agencies to expose the Krakoans as a possible threat to humans. Mikhail Rasputin basically made his brother kill the woman he was in love with, for the sake of ruining the state of the world or whatever his evil plans actually are. The interesting bit that ends this issue is that right after we see Colossus burying Kayla, Professor X shows up at his doorstep. Make what you will of that coincidental timing. Exploring some of his other memorable comic book story arcs. Morlocks. After a struggle with the X-Men, Mikhail eventually became overcome by terror of his visions and escaped from the X-Men into the Morlock tunnels, where he eventually collapsed and drowned the Morlocks home, taking them with him. However, they survived because Mikhail utilized his strength to create a new spatial breach to the evil planet known as the Hill. In essence, the Hill was nothing more than a hill. The Morlocks now lived in a cutthroat civilization, climbing tiers on this vast hill and engaging in combat to advance. They were made to either kill or immediately perish. The people who managed to reach the summit were declared fit and permitted to join G-Nation. After the X-Men were disbanded by Colossus and Marrow, Mikhail kidnapped them from a gallery where a Piotr picture of Ilyana was displayed. He then took them all to the hill and attempted to manipulate Colossus's imagination to bring the drawing to life. Colossus declined to work with Mikhail, angering his brother. Marrow has a whole recollection of her early life on the hill and the things she had done to survive. Marrow assaulted Mikhail after recalling everything. After a struggle, they learned Mikhail was under the control of an alien entity, which they eventually managed to expel. A knocked out Mikhail was transported to the X-Men Treatment Center, where Apocalypse kidnapped him. The Bloodlines arc. Mikhail reappeared when he helped Mr. Sinister eliminate the members of the larger Rasputin family. Mikhail seemed to be experiencing headaches, possibly as a result of being so close to his family. He was able to transport Colossus and himself to a realm made of solid stone, and he left Piotr there for him to take on the role of Rasputin alone and assimilate all of the scattered elements of his forefather Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin's psyche. Mikhail, however, hesitated to help Sinister since he seemed to be influenced by the positive traits of some of his family. To ensure that Rasputin would never be born again, he exiled himself into an interdimensional void after returning to the Rock universe to save Piotr. Mikhail appears to have exiled himself to a location known as Kapalan in order to ward against the curse of Rasputin. Age of Apocalypse. Mikhail was one of the Russian mutants who fought against Apocalypse's invasion during the Age of Apocalypse. He attracted Apocalypse's notice when he was successful in taking down War, one of his horsemen. Apocalypse was impressed by Mikhail's triumph and kidnapped and brainwashed him. Mikhail was given responsibility for the central United States after becoming a prelate and one of Apocalypse's horsemen. Later, he took a squad of Infinite soldiers to Moscow, where he learned that his brother Colossus had taken over as the Soviet super soldiers' new commander. Despite their best efforts, these groups could not defeat their previous leader, and all except Colossus perished. Despite being brainwashed for months, Mikhail was unable to slay his brother. When the X-Men came, they drove Apocalypse away just as Colossus was about to escape his mind control. After going through months of indoctrination and experimental operations that eventually caused him to lose his mind, Mikhail withdrew into solitude and put his his powers into himself, drastically changing his physiology and looks. Even Apocalypse had never imagined having the kind of power he now possessed after transforming his flesh into a human-robot hybrid and creating portals within his own head. After years of self-mutation, Mikhail had no fear, not even of Apocalypse. Apocalypse assigned Mikhail the additional duty of overseeing his Eurasian domains upon his return. The Strife Force, a group of survivors from Mikhail's upscale program, which transformed regular people into cyborgs under his control, served as his personal army. By his side was his major domo, or housekeeper. Yes, I learned that from The Witcher. Keeper Murdoch, who served Rasputin out of genuine gratitude because he thought Rasputin's upscale program was the source of his abilities. Bruce Banner, a researcher seeking self-mutation, who received a supply of mutant research subjects in return for his assistance, was one of Mikhail's human associates. Rasputin left North America and made an unfulfilled offer of peace to the Human High Council after leaving. The so-called Forgotten Horsemen had the Council agents in custody on board his ships and intended to assassinate the Human High Council members. He intended to seize control of all of Europe by controlling everyone's emotions using the captured empath's enhanced abilities. Rasputin's fleet was nonetheless taken under the custody of Council agents. Donald Blake, who supposedly killed the Horseman by slicing him straight through the heart with his cane and pushing him outside of the Big Ben at the expense of his own life, stopped Mikhail from killing the Council leaders.
You cannot defeat all of me.
He also appears in a memorable X-Men game. Action role-playing game X-Men Legends 2 Rise of Apocalypse was created mostly by Raven Software and released by Activision. It is the sequel to X-Men Legends from 2004. It was made available in September 2005 for the Xbox, GameCube, PlayStation 2, PlayStation Portable, N-Gage, and Microsoft Windows. The mutant villain Apocalypse serves as the main enemy in this sequel to X-Men Legends. The Brotherhood of Mutants villains would have to team up with the X-Men to defeat a larger menace in the game's narrative, which the creator planned to have a larger feeling of scale than the predecessor. The cinematics were made by Blur Studio. Also included was multiplayer online. In X-Men Legends 2 Rise of Apocalypse, Scott McDonald voices Mikhail Rasputin. When the X-Men go up against Apocalypse in the Savage Land, Mikhail is the second horseman they come across. Given the context of the game, it makes sense that his appearance is more akin to that of his persona from the Age of Apocalypse tale from Marvel Comics than to his more conventional form. He was frequently mentioned as Colossus' older brother, yet they don't interact particularly. There were no communicative voice lines where they recognized each other. This version of him is capable of self-duplication, energy blasts, super speed, and the creation of minions out of inanimate items. What makes Mikhail Rasputin so powerful? Omega-level mutants, of which Magneto and Jean Grey are excellent examples, have almost limitless abilities. Like Wolverine and Colossus, Alpha-level mutants have extraordinary powers as well, albeit on a lesser scale. These mutants are more than capable of handling themselves in conflict with just about anyone despite their diminutive size. Mikhail's status as an alpha-level mutant was made known in X-Men number 97, written by Alan Davis and Terry Kavanagh, published in 2000. He has repeatedly avoided death without using the mutant resurrection techniques, and each time he appears to be stronger than before. Although Mikhail's abilities were never clearly defined, maybe because there was no mention of how far his power could go, he showed some evidence of the capacity to rearrange matter. He could control Iceman's body, forcibly merge a man with a tree, and perform other odd deeds. In addition, he made use of his abilities to teleport, manipulate other people's abilities, and fire energy blasts. By creating spatial portals, he was able to transport not only himself, but others too. He was able to recognize Iceman's potential just by looking at him, thus it's hard to say if he had improved perception or not. Mikhail was able to teach Bobby how to use his abilities more effectively without ever having met him before. Mikhail Rasputin, the brother of the X-Men Colossus, an alpha-level mutant and a renowned X-Men nemesis, has made a comeback in the pages of X-Force as an adversary of the Krakoan government. He is not an Omega-level mutant, but his abilities nonetheless make him a tough foe. Mikhail first appeared in Will Sportacio, Jim Lee, and John Byrne's Uncanny X-Men number 285 in 1992. Mikhail has energy-based abilities as well as the ability to manipulate subatomic matter, teleport, create energy blasts, and control them. Mikhail has also shown the capacity to imbue inanimate items with life. The entire country of Krakoa is already in danger as a result of Mikhail's appearance. He has provided funding to Xeno, the anti-mutant group that kidnapped Domino and used her clone to launch an assault on the island country of mutants. He was also behind a recent assault by warriors who had undergone genetic modification and had been successful in reclaiming the coveted Cerebro sword. The last time we saw Mikhail was in X-Men Colossus Bloodline in 2005, directed by David Hine and written by George Lucas, with Mr. Sinister. Due to his realization that he was insane and out of concern for Colossus, Mikhail ultimately banished himself to the Dark Zone. Years later, Mikhail has returned and is now appearing in the chapters of X-Force as an anti-Krakoan mutant. He is an alpha-level mutant who could have recently developed into an omega-level menace, while it is uncertain how his power levels have risen since his exile. Conclusion. So there you have it, guys. This enormous beast of a mutant may be alpha level at the moment, but there's no telling when he will transcend to omega level. He is ruthless and cruel when he wants to be, but also he could be kind and caring as we first see him to be. There is no telling where he will go in the X-Men story or how important he may become. This character definitely has very high potential to start playing bigger parts in the Marvel Universe, possibly even tossing it on its own head, if he felt crazy enough. If you've stuck around till the end, we thank you for watching. It meant a lot to us. Hope you liked the video, and we'll see you in the next one. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.